All right, so I'm almost ready to go. Tell me if I sound robotic or anything. But I actually wanted to do a hangout because Vigilant Christian had did a hangout earlier with Josh Peck, and they were talking about the Genesis flood and giants and this and that and blah blah blah. And I just think everything they said in the hangout was almost generally wrong. Um, because almost everything they said in the hangout were things I used to believe about the flood, and I don't believe that anymore. But I do think I have more rational reasons, or I guess better arguments, or even a more cohesive understanding of the flood and how that all worked behind it. Um, I was waiting for General to get in the room, if he's even up or anything. But I don't know where he's at, so I might just do this solo. Hold on, ladies and gents. I'm pull some stuff on my screen. Let me see. 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 I can't find what I'm looking for. Oh, we don't have that many viewers anyway. So if push comes to shove, I might just. Oh no, I'll be good. So basically, in the beginning of Hangout, it starts with Mario and Josh Peck. I don't even know if I can even pull this thing up. Hey, Mike. I don't even know if I can pull this thing up. Where Josh is talking with Mario, and they're talking about the flood, like I said before. And then they start going into like the Nephilim. Hold on. Oh, I think nope. Oh, they might still be talking. Hold on. And they're talking about the flood and et cetera, and like the giants and like I noticed just Christians today have some very, very, very weird beliefs about almost everything. I mean, you got Christians who think that the earth is flat, Christians who think that the earth is 6,000 years old, Christians who think that evolution is a lie. You have Christians who think that modern medicine is conspiracy, Christians who think that people are conspiring against us so we can't read the King James Version. You got Christians who think that everybody in the Bible is black. You have Christians who think that white people are of the devil, or that the Jews are evil and Jews are trying to take over the world. And so you have so many Christians with so many different beliefs, and each belief is just as crazy as the other. And myself as a Christian, I mean, sometimes it even makes me like take a step back and just say, you people are crazy. And so it really is like far and few in between where you do find Christians who actually are normal, who don't have any crazy beliefs except for the belief that, hey, there is a God and God exists, which some people might think that belief in of itself is crazy, but I think it's actually pretty reasonable to accept or to believe in. But long story short, Mario was talking with this guy, Josh Peck. I'm about to share it on my screen. Give me a minute. Give me a second. Hey, Brenda. Yeah, the only famous Wayne I like is Wayne Brady. I know the guy Dwayne Gish. He is a piece of work. And that's all I'm going to say about him. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, so this video, I don't know if you can even see this or not. There you go. Yeah, it's screen sharing. So this video starts off with Mario And let me see if I can fast forward to, there you go, this guy, Josh Peck. And they're talking about the flood. So maybe I should just let it play. And hold on, give me a minute. I'm going to see if my speakers play.
Don't remember or you didn't see last week's stream, Josh was on and he shared his testimony with us, and we went over some basic things. So if this is the first time you're tuning in on Saturdays at 8 o'clock here Eastern time, you can tune in, and me and Josh are going to be going over really cool subjects. It's usually what you would hear people describe as fringe topics. So we're going to be talking about aliens, UFOs, CERN, all sorts of stuff, quantum physics. And I really do hope that that's a blessing to you. And if you're not a Christian, you know, maybe this will intrigue you to get into the Word of God and see that it has some pretty cool things in there and some answers to those questions that might surprise you. So today we've actually, we decided last week to go ahead and do today on.
All right, I'm not going to play all of it. I just want to get to like the nitty gritty and when they start talking about like the beliefs and stuff like that. Now, I'm not tearing down, of course, like you guys know, I'm not tearing down their belief in God. I believe in the same God they do, Yahweh, Jehovah, Jesus Christ. But I always say this, I believe in God, but I don't necessarily believe in God the same way other Christians do. I mean, I would hope that Mario and Josh Peck and like these other Christians who are like, have these Christian platforms, I would hope they have a justifiable belief, or I guess a reasonable faith, right? So they have justifiable reasons or arguments for why they believe what they believe. But I think the reasons they give in particular for believing in the type of Genesis flood they hold to, I think those reasons or those arguments or the supposed evidences they give for why they believe in that particular interpretation of the Genesis flood, I think are flawed. Because as you guys know, I don't think a global flood ever happened. I don't think there was a global flood. I don't think that's what the Bible particularly meant when it said that the whole earth was flooded. And I also believe that when Christians look at an old text like the Bible, or not an old text like the Bible, Christians only do this with the Bible and only the Bible. They don't come to any other ancient text like this. They read into the text their scientific understanding. For example, we think, or we know the earth is round, but when we look at, I think it's like Isaiah, and I'm saying Isaiah because that's how you actually pronounce the name. When you look at Isaiah like 40:22, and it talks about the circle of the earth, we say, oh, they believe the earth was round. No, because a couple verses later, Isaiah talks about a ball. So he knew the difference between a circle and a ball. And scientifically, for the shape of the earth, he used the wrong word. So I'm just saying, when it comes to the Bible and ancient texts and stuff like that, Christians do a bad job. And for the people who are like probably tuning in and like probably like trying to say like, you know, why am I arguing for Christians or like the people who wrote the Bible believing in a flat earth? They did. I'm fine with that. I don't think the Bible's a science book. But when you start giving out bad science in the name of your religion, that's where we got to talk. And so I'm just going to go and I'm going to let the video play out. I'm not going to play all the video, of course. I'm just going to play little clips and snippets. And I'm basically going to be doing a critique of Mario and Josh Peck's video on the Genesis flood. So let me just fast forward. I just want to get to the good parts.
Not angels, but were...
Here you go.
And yeah, I just wanted to interject there because we talked about this last week. I find that is one of the most obvious signs of like how we interpret Genesis 6. We had talked previously last week about, if you don't know, Genesis 6 records what we believe to be an intermingling with the Watchers, the fallen angels, you could say, and the daughters of men. And some people believe that, the Watchers or the sons of God described there are actual humans. There's not any type of angelic. But how could two humans come together and give birth to giants, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the human interpretation, it's called the Sethite theory, which we'll get into in a moment. But yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, even if they are, even if it was the line of Seth, and you would, cousins don't produce that. We would see that today even,
Right.
but never before in history has that happened. So now that verse in Genesis doesn't directly tell us who the sons of God are. So to define the sons of God, and this is why we believe that they're angels, we compare Scripture with Scripture. It's a good principle on how to approach the Bible. So the term sons of God, it's defined for us twice in the book of Job. Job 1:6 reads, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." So clearly we're talking about angels here. We're not talking about humans. And,
right. And that's in Job, right?
Yeah, that's Job 1:6. And then Job 38:4-7. This is like the big telltale one. "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth?" So this is God talking to Job. "Declare if thou hast understanding, who hath laid the measurements thereof, if thou knowest, or who hath stretched the line upon it, whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened, or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and the sun..."
All right, so I would agree with that. Yeah, I do think that just looking at it straight from the scripture, straight from the Bible alone, looking at the language, as Michael Heiser says, from the linguistics of it, I do think you could argue that the sons of God are indefinitely not humans. They are not human men, but these are angels. These are divine beings coming down from their heavenly estate, like Jude says, and intermingling with the daughters of men. Yes, I do believe that is what the text says. And so historically, because I do believe in the Bible, I do think that did happen. And I would argue that I have certain pieces of evidences that that could, I would say, give me good reasons to believe it. But I think my version of it is a little different than their version. So I'll let them keep on talking, and I'll let you guys hear their version of the flood and the angels coming down and cohabitating with women, and then I'll give my version of it because I think my version of how it happened is more reasonable, and it fits as a better explanation.
Of God shouted for joy. So clearly God here is talking about the creation of the earth, the heavens and the earth. He's talking about creation. And while this is happening, the morning stars and all the sons of God shouted for joy. That's what God is telling Job here. Clearly we're not talking about humans. It can't be. Humans weren't created yet. So it's a good example of how we can allow the Bible to define itself
its
for
own
us.
Terms. Exactly.
Yeah. Now you brought up the Sethite theory, and I believe that it's a misinterpretation of Scripture that's it's been floating around, and some people believe it, and that's fine. Of course, we don't need to divide on an issue like that, but I think that it's caused some confusion. So it's called the Sethite theory, and I remember when I first was taught that theory about the Nephilim and everything. It was before I knew anything about Nephilim or the pre-flood world. It was before I had any real scriptural backing of my own to base my own beliefs on. I had a limited understanding of what fallen angels actually were and what caused the flood. So I was under the impression that angels were nothing but ethereal beings with no real physicality to them, and I couldn't understand how, and this is a question that a lot of people have, how can an ethereal being that's not really made of anything, how could it impregnate a physical woman? So I began asking around to find the truth, but the problem was I was relying on other people for my answer instead of just bringing up directly with God and through the Bible. And I believe that when you leave God out of the interpretation process, you get misinterpretations, such as, in my opinion, the Sethite theory. Now, there have been many variations of the Sethite theory, but basically it states that the sons of God mentioned in Genesis 6:2 were not angels, but were male descendants of Seth. The daughters of men mentioned in the same verse were the ungodly female descendants of Cain. That's what this theory says. So the theory states that the descendants of Seth mated with the descendants of Cain and produced the giants, or the Nephilim.
And I think right here, I think this is where he's going to actually get into his biology of how it happened. Now, I want you guys to pay attention to like what he's about to say, because this is where I would actually disagree. So I think if you guys look back at my older videos, I actually have my own model of what I think might have happened. And so my old model, I basically posited, I say, look, angels don't have bodies. But you know, it could be that because an angel would actually be an extra dimensional being, because they exist outside of our three-dimensional universe. And so if angels existed, you know how people say I don't believe in God and I don't believe in angels. Well, actually, angels physically would be realer than you and I ever could be, because they exist in a higher plane of space. So we only have access to these three dimensions, and of course, through the power of super strength theory, we know there's about 11 dimensions, but we can't see, touch, taste, or feel them. We just know they're real because the math works out. And so if angels exist in at least 11 plus dimensions that we don't have access to. And so angels would be a lot realer than you and I ever could be, at least for now. But in my own model, I had said maybe it could be that angels descended from their planet space, from heaven. They descended from their heavenly realm, and it could be they transformed into maybe Neanderthals. And I say that not from anything in the Bible, but if you look at natural history, I will place the flood to be around 45,000 years ago. Why? Because I think if Adam and Eve were historical people, and I say if, because you could argue, you can make legitimate arguments for Adam and Eve not being historical people. So if the correct reading of the text says that Adam and Eve are in fact historical, they had to have existed around 45 to 50,000 years ago. Why? Because from the locality of the Garden of Eden, if the Garden of Eden is a real location, if it's near the Euphrates and Tigris River, that is in Iraq, in the Near East. And we know from, the origins of humanity, at least, that humans didn't arrive in the Near East until 50,000 years ago. Now, the human race as a population didn't pop up until 200,000 years ago in Africa, right? And then 50,000 years ago, we migrated from Africa to the Near East. And so Adam and Eve would have been a part of that population who were farming in the Middle East. And so if Adam existed, they would have been the first batch of ancient Near Eastern farmers. Now, this is just from looking at the natural evidence alone, but also looking at the evidence. We know around 45,000 years ago in the Near East, people were intermingling with Neanderthals. And so now you see the correlation. People were intermingling with Neanderthals. Genesis 6 says that people were intermingling with the sons of God. And so in my model, I basically posited, maybe, this is where this whole Genesis 6 narrative is coming from. There's some truth into it. Where because the ancient people didn't have the correct scientific methodology, right? They didn't know, or of course they wouldn't call it Neanderthals like we were. They were just humans to them. And so it could be that even when you look at the book of Enoch, it says that the sons of God transformed into humans, because of course the guy who wrote Enoch and like the writers of the Bible they didn't call them Neanderthals. They would have just been like pre-Adamite humans or whatever, right? It could be that the angels had transformed into Neanderthal bodies, had coitus with these women, and as a result they produced tall people. And when I say tall people, Notice Mario and Josh, they're arguing for really tall people. They're arguing for people who might have been 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, 11 foot, whatever foot tall. And the cutoff rate of my model would be, I think the tallest people would have been around 6'7" around that day. They would have been no taller than 6'7", and the average person would have been around 5'6". So to a 5'5", 5'6" person, right? A 6'7" and Goliath would have been 6'6". A 6'6" person compared to somebody like me, who's like 5'5", that is extremely tall. So that person would be a giant. Hence why the biblical authors thought that these 6 foot people were giants, because they were, but not in the same sense you and I think of giants. Because a 6 foot person today is, a little like above average height. And so they're arguing for people who are 8 foot, 9 foot tall. And look at his explanation for, how he thinks this happened. Now, I do have to say, and what I just explained to you guys, that's my old model of how I think it happened. But what happened was I found some new evidence that, yes, I was correct. There were 6 foot tall people, 6'7" tall people around 45 to 50,000 years ago. I was right. However, I think they looked at the DNA within the bones of these people, and they were human, 100% human people. So it wasn't like a mixing of like Neanderthal DNA that made these people human. So the explanation behind why people begin to get that tall was because I think the paper said they were getting more nutrients from meat, and so it was the nutrients in meat that were giving these people proteins and etc. So it helped them to grow taller. And so my model for explaining why people got to be that tall was then falsified. And so I moved back from that model to now, how could I explain how women could, give birth to uh, these really tall people or whatever, like what's the genetics behind this phenomena? What's the biological process of how an angel could get a woman pregnant? I don't know. I don't really know. Um, I can't really go into the biology of it now because my last model got falsified. That would have been my explanation, but now I've moved back from that, and now I just say I don't know. But if you take my model to be correct, because Josh and Mario are younger creationists, so they don't even think we can even go back in time as far as 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago. But if you accept that the Earth is old, we do have evidence that there were tall people living 50,000 years ago. We do have evidence that Mesopotamia got flooded all the time. So you don't have to argue for a global flood, but you could say that the flood was local, but it was global in judgment. So we do have evidence that Mesopotamia was flooded all the time. And we also do have evidence of the numbers in the Bible as far as like how big the ark was and stuff like that. Those are base 60 numbers, not base 10. And so the size of the ark would be a lot more reasonable. And Noah also would have been a Near Eastern farmer. And so you have the story of this farmer building this small ark so he can save his barn animals from the coming local flood. And I think it's a lot more reasonable to accept that model of the flood than the model that Mario and Josh Peck are arguing for. So here's his explanation of what he thinks happened.
In Hebrew. Now, there is disagreement as to what giant actually means within people who subscribe to the Sethite theory. Some believe that it means actual literal giants, while others believe it just means they were mighty human warriors. Some even believe it means evil offspring connected to the term seed of Satan and stuff like that, referenced from Genesis 3:15. But the truth, as you know, we'll see, it's a bit of all three. The problem with the theory is, it's, in my opinion, it's just unbiblical. You can't find it in the Bible. And I don't want to trample all over somebody else's beliefs. And again, it's not something that we have to divide on, but we do have to learn to take the Bible for what it is. We don't want to allow ourselves to lose the ability to discern the truth from God through His Word, or It'll just be that much easier for the enemy to deceive us in other things. So to make this Sethite theory fit, one would have to completely change the meaning of scriptures, even the original Hebrew that defines angels from Job 38, 4 through 7, giants, Genesis 6, 2 through 4, and man, which is Genesis 6, 1 through 7. So the Sethite theory just does not add up when it's compared to the rest of the Bible without completely rewriting the scriptures themselves. And that's dangerous because it can keep the believer away from the truth. It can make a believer look for the wrong thing in people by trying to find out who's a descendant of the mating between Cain and Seth's line, instead of actually looking at their heart and discerning the spirit. And of course, there's some people like that in other camps too, but it can lead the believer to even lifting the Sethite theory about the validity of the Bible, because we even have historical context that the first century Jews, and Dr. Michael Heiser has done a bunch of work on this, way more than I have, and actually any work that I've done, I've got from him in these regards, because he's awesome. Yeah, he is. Him and Derek Gilbert too. He did a bunch of research. I'm not as much of a history buff as they are, but even in the first century Jewish culture, it was just widely believed. They all believed that when it talked about the Nephilim, those were giants. It was from fallen angels and humans mating. But they had a different idea of what an angel actually was. In our culture, we're told that they're almost like ghosts, like they're not really made of anything. In their culture, angels were solid, more solid than us even. I mean, there are passages all throughout the Bible where angels are eating or
and walking among the disciples even, I think, at one point, and they don't even know. You know what I mean? Like, and we're told too that we are to be nice to people because we never know when we could be entertaining an angel, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they can look human when they're in our earthly dimension, and when they're in their natural habitat in heaven, sometimes they can look pretty strange, as we find out in the Book of Revelation and other places.
That's right, with the cherubim and the seraphim.
Yeah, but they're solid. They're actually more solid than we are. They take up more spatial dimensions than we do, so they actually have more physicality to them. But the reason that we don't see them all the time, or why it's easy for them to not be seen unless they want to, is because they have more dimensions to operate in. So it's a lot easier.
Right. What I'm just going to point out, I was on that topic. We should do a show to clarify all those different, like angels, familiar spirits, cherubim. Go through I'll note time shift, and a lot of people, especially.
I don't look at them as God-breathed, inspired word, but I do look at them as history. Kind of like, our history books today, we trust that they're accurate, but we also know that they might not be totally accurate, because it's just a history book. So I kind of look at it like that. But the important thing is the first century Jews, like around the time of Jesus, they were reading the Book of Enoch, and we know that because of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered. So they understood that interpretation.
And I'll just interject one last thing. I didn't clarify at the start. These are issues, guys, that are not to cause division. So you can disagree with us on this entire broadcast and think we're quacky and our view of Genesis 6 is just out of this world. We're still your brother and sister in the Lord. We believe the same foundational cardinal truths. That's what's important. We believe in the gospel and the cross and salvation by faith alone in Jesus Christ. But these are cool things. I like looking at them, and I know you do, and a lot of people in here. So
and also one more, and there's a lot of other reasons why this could be important, just above even just general interest. But I'll kind of tease this for later, because this is eventually what we'll be getting to. But this could have direct ties with the alien abduction phenomena, and people. I really believe that people do suffer from actual abduction scenarios and things.
Oh yeah, there's a phenomenon that would be a cool show as well, and tying in how the demonic and the different things, even advanced UFO
with humanity. Well, that is straight from Genesis 6. I mean, it's the same enemy, it's the same fallen beings. Instead of being understood as fallen angels, as aliens from another planet. But I don't.
That's important to distinguish as well. When we're saying alien, we're not talking about, the big alien gray type alien. exactly how you say it. It's just that in today's world, this concept of an otherworldly being, which would
I'm trying to fast forward to the good stuff, guys. They're talking about aliens and UFOs and stuff like that, man. Not really my forte.
be, the fallen angel.
Cherubim and cherub. So for Hebrew, im is the plural. So that's where we get Nephilim. It's literally giants. So the King James refers to them as giants. There are some other Bible translations, like the NIV will refer to them as Nephilim. I usually just quote from the King James Bible. I'm not a King James only guy, but just because I think it's fine, the King,
I do this.
It helps because they're personally I like the ESV, but I know some people could lose out on information if you don't quote from the Bible that's generally kind of preferred. So I usually quote from the King James. But anyway, so in our modern vernacular, the word Nephilim, it's the most common and recognizable word referring to the giant offspring of the fallen angels and human women. So we, instead of using like a broad term like giants, a lot of people prefer to say Nephilim, but either one's fine. Now, what's interesting is that the definition of the Hebrew word Nephal, which is to fall, can also mean cast down, die, fall, fallen, inferior, be lost, perish, rot, throw down, among other things. Actually, a really good resource if people want to look this up for themselves. They can go to blueletterbible.com. And if you look at the King James version of whatever verse you're looking for, and then you can click a little box that says Strong's Concordance, you can look up all the Hebrew terms, and it'll tell you what everything means. So the Nephilim, they were fallen, they were inferior, lost beings. They perished with no hope of salvation because they weren't fallen in the sense that angels who created them were fallen. That the angels once had a high estate in heaven. Then they just, some of them disobeyed God and then became fallen. They became fallen. The Nephilim, on the other hand, they were fallen right from the start. They were always known as Nephilim, even from the time that they were first born. So it's not that they were once like a good creation, because some circles will teach that they weren't men that were first created with hope at redemption. They were born
abominable, just an abomination.
Exactly. So they were made to perish, and in a spiritual sense, they were dead upon creation. And some people might say, well, how is that fair? They didn't even have a chance. They didn't ask to be created. Right. Well, I fully believe, and this just wouldn't happen because they were just demonic. They were just demonic in every sense of the word. But if a hypothetical thing, where one of them actually wanted to, repent, but I have to believe that God would have allowed some type of provision for that, but it just didn't happen. None of them wanted anything to do with God. And this actually, another reason why this is important is because it's a good apologetics tool, because it when you trace out the line of the Nephilim after the flood, there's a lot of verses in the Bible where God will tell people to go and slaughter a whole city, or even burn the animals, kill the animals even. And sometimes atheists will look at that and wonder, well, what kind of maniac, what kind of God is this? He's a maniac. And of course, without context, anybody reading that would think the same thing. So I'm not downing anybody for that. Well, the reason is when you actually trace back the tribes that God was telling his children to wipe out, they were Nephilim tribes. They were giant tribes. They weren't human. They somehow had survived the flood. We don't know how. There's a couple theories on that, which we could probably get into a little later.
Okay, so this is where I give my first critique. Everything else Josh has been saying is pretty much been on the money. But this is, I guess, where you get like different interpretations. Where Josh is trying to justify the Old Testament, I guess, holy wars, or I guess you could say like wars over cosmic geography. Josh is saying that is justified because the people who the Israelites were fighting against, they weren't human. Well, I don't think that's the case. And I know like Josh brought up Michael Heiser a couple minutes ago. And I think Michael Heiser would disagree. The reason why God told, see, and Josh will have a point. If you just said humans, but yes, God said, hey, even kill the animals as well, burn their houses, burn everything down, etc., etc. Now, if Yahweh just wanted the Israelites to just dismantle a certain race of giants or race of hybrids because they weren't human, how come the animals and everything else had to be burnt and destroyed as well? Because of course, like, the angels weren't like intermingling with the animals or anything, right? And like, you can't intermingle with something that's not like a biological life. Like, you can't intermingle with a shirt or like a cloth or nothing like that. So like, I don't know why God would tell them to like destroy it, like, burn the shirts and burn the gold and all that stuff. Don't take anything with you. It's not, and this is actually an answer probably Heiser will probably give. It's not that these people were not human. The Bible doesn't teach that at all. And also, like, these people didn't know anything about like genetics or anything like that. The reason why God told the Israelites to go out and wipe out these other nations is the same reason why other religions and other people groups fought people all the time, thousands of years ago. It was over land. People fought over land all the time. And what happened was, if one nation or one people group won a battle or they won the land of another people group, they would then offer up that land to their God. And so Yahweh is having the Israelites go across the earth and reclaim the land back unto him. And so that's why the animals and the shirts and the buildings and the temples and the false gods and etc. had to be burned down, because it was now Yahweh's land. That's why you see one place in the Bible where Dagon, the head of Dagon, is like torn off, and the priests walk over, or they kind of like tiptoe, or they walk around that specific piece of land where Yahweh had tore off the head of Dagon, because it was then understood that the land was holy, or that land was set apart, or that land belonged to the deity who overtook it. And so you have this picture where the Israelites are going over, conquering different lands, reclaiming the land back to Yahweh. That is what happened. And it's a much more grander and sophisticated theology than, oh, these people just weren't human. Because me, in all honesty, I do think that whether, there were people are aliens, right? Like, let's say aliens exist somewhere out in the distant universe or whatever, right? I think Jesus died for them as well, because I think that's what Jesus did when he died on the cross. So not only you have this constant picture where God in the Old Testament, he's constantly trying to reclaim the land back unto himself, reclaim the land back unto himself. And so when Jesus comes onto the scene, I think this type of theology is a lot more sophisticated, because when Jesus comes onto the scene and he dies on the cross, not only does Jesus reclaim the land, reclaim his people, but he also reclaims the universe back unto himself. So now, whether there's angels or wherever else out in the universe, other life forms or other people out in the world or out in like distant cosmos, then Jesus also reclaims them as well, because Jesus didn't just reclaim the human race, but Jesus reclaimed the cosmos when he died on the cross. And so I think that's a better picture of the gospel. I think it's more realistic, and I don't think you need I don't think you need to justify the wars in the Old Testament with these people not being human, because whether they're human or not, or etc., I think God is a lot more powerful than that, and God can reclaim them because Jesus reclaimed the world. So yeah, that's what I would say in response to Josh and Mario. I wish Mario would have had me on there. I wish when people have these type of discussions, they actually have somebody with an opposing view, because I would have said this had I been in the room or had I been invited. So that would be one of the first things I disagree with. I'm going to let him keep on talking now.
But so that's another reason it's a good apologetics tool, because it answers some of those.
It's not a good apologetic. You're going to make yourself sound foolish, and you're going to make God sound like a monster. But okay.
Questions like how can God be a good God if he's killing everybody in the Old Testament? It's like, well, he's he's not really killing people, you know. He in a sense, he's chasing the monsters away.
Right. And because the terminology or the way the Bible expresses it is like kill all women and children, like kill the bloodline of that entire tribe. And exactly that, right? A lot of people don't realize that it's because they were Nephilim and God was trying to put an end to it. And even Christians who try and defend this, it's like, I remember when Chris White, it was one of his videos that brought that up, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. You know, that's why our God's not evil. He's not just like out there like, get all the, kill them all. I want everyone squashed just because. No, he had a higher understanding and wisdom. He knew that they were like procreating and keeping this Nephilim bloodline going, so it's to put an end to it.
Yeah, and that was the whole purpose of the flood in the first place. The whole flood happened because
the genes of Noah, it says, right? He was perfect in his genealogies.
Yeah, he was the last one. Him and his daughters were the last people on earth who weren't infected and just beyond salvation. There's
no. Gosh. So this is where I would disagree as well. So like, you know, Josh and Mario will believe like, you know, Adam and Eve were first people, and not only were they first people, but Noah and his sons, after the flood, they were the only people on the planet. That's not what the text even says. But you don't need to have this like type of interpretation so you can believe in the Bible, or at least so you can even believe in the Genesis accounts. You don't need Adam and Eve to be the first people, and you don't need Noah and his family to be the only people on the planet. Because like I said, you could hold to the position that the flood was a local flood, but it was global in judgment from their point of view. So there were other people outside of Mesopotamia when all of this was going down. Noah and his family were not the only people on the entire planet, but they might have been the only people who survived in their region, which is a lot more reasonable, because we know that the human race has never been under like 10,000 people. So I think it's a lot easier to just accept this point of view than that model, because it corresponds with the reality that we live in. As a matter of fact, somebody has said something in the comments, I'm sorry, in the live chat, and they said, you know, what if we just accept the flood as just a story that was passed down from generation to generation to give a wise lesson, which that could be the case. And I like how this guy said it. Hold on, let me look at the live chat, because your point for this, Awesome Avenger. Hold on, scrolling up to what you said. He said, Noah's story is just a story about being prepared for the worst. I like that. I like that point of view. He says everyone else just laughs at Noah, and they say that, you know, the rain will never come, but it does. It's an age-old cultural-wide lesson and preparedness. It's like the little squirrel who hoards his nuts for winter. I love this point of view. That's a very good point of view of how he interprets the flood story, and I wouldn't knock it at all. The only thing is, I would take it to be historical, because when you look at the New Testament and we look at Jesus, who says, you know, the end would be like the days of Noah, people were eating and drinking and marrying, and then the flood came and killed them all. Or when you look at Jude, where Jude certainly believed that Genesis 6 was historical, where he says that the angels who left their first estate are now shackled and chained to darkness until they get judged. So these people who wrote the New Testament, they definitely did believe that Genesis 6 was historical. And so I think if you do believe the New Testament to be reliable, I think that the input of the authors and their point of view when it comes to Genesis 6 and 7, I think is something to be considered. Now, they could be wrong about Genesis 6 being historical and etc. Just because they're right about the resurrection, it doesn't necessarily mean they're right about the historicity of Noah's Ark and etc. Adam and Eve, like I said, it very well could be that Adam and Eve might not have had even existed. But I think it's reasonable to conclude that they were historical people from the text. They obviously were real. They had children. Their children had children. If you look at Adam and Eve, their children had real genealogies and etc. But um, of course, like Adam and Eve did not repopulate the entire planet. So I mean, you could argue both ways. I think that the historicity of it is a lot reasonable, but I don't believe it in the same way as like a younger creationist would believe. I think my point of view on it is a lot more consistent. And you can do that. You can believe in the historicity of the New Testament and the Genesis accounts and the Old Testament, etc. But you can also have a consistent point of view of how it all fits together. If I'm talking to somebody that's a non-believer, who's like, let's say they're a geologist, right, in the field, and they don't believe in the Bible at all, I think they would be more willing to accept that if I do take the flood account historically, notice how I don't use the word literally. I don't like the word, but if I take the flood account historically, it's more reasonable to believe that the flood was local. A geologist in the field would actually agree, like, yeah, like if there was a flood, it probably was a local flood, it wasn't a worldwide flood, etc., and it didn't kill the whole world. I think it's a lot more reasonable. But also from the text, if you go on, because I don't think I have this on my YouTube channel yet, but if you go on Han Solo's, if you go on General's YouTube channel, he has a video dedicated to that by Michael Heiser. Well, Michael Heiser actually argues for a local flood from the biblical text. So he doesn't like use any science or anything. He just looks at the text and he looks at the language, and from the language of the text, it does seem to imply that these people are referring to a local event that happened. So I'm going to let this play out some more. I might be ending this, and maybe I might start like a new hangout.
No redemption, for the Nephilim. So the rest of the world wasn't infected. They weren't human. And when you think ahead, why did Jesus die on the cross? He came as a man, as a human. He shed his human blood for humanity, for his children. Well, if somebody's not a human, then they're not, like a fallen angel can't claim the blood of Jesus. They're not human. Only a human can. And that also gets into areas of why gene tampering and transhumanism and things like that are really dangerous practices. But that was the reason for the flood. That's God didn't kill everybody. He actually saved humanity by and he let it happen, giving everybody a chance to repent. And until all that was left was Noah and his sons and their daughters. Now we don't really know anything about the daughters, and there might be something going on there that we'll get into a little later. But Noah and his sons were the last clean line. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'll get into all that, and I can get into all the Hebrew to show people, but what all that means. But anyway, so again, now it might seem harsh at first glance that there wasn't any redemption possible for the giants, but there are people who will say, well, if the Nephilim gene is still around today, then does that mean that there are people today who can't be saved?
So yeah, let me answer that for him. I don't believe there necessarily is a Nephilim gene. We would have found it by now. If there was a gene that causes somebody to mutate and become a giant or something like that, we would have found it now with all the information that we have in modern genetics. A gene like that just doesn't exist. But also, I would say, because the implications of the cross of Jesus, of the sacrifice of Jesus, are spiritual, I don't think genetics have anything to do with it. You are saved by grace, right, through faith in Jesus Christ, and it's not of yourself. It's the free gift of God. So you had nothing to do with it, not your genetics, not your bloodline, not you being a human. It is God's grace that he gives to you. And didn't Jesus say, before he ascended into heaven, he said, go across to the four corners of the earth and preach the gospel to every creature? So that would include a human being who has Nephilim DNA. They could get saved too if they wanted to. Awesome Avenger, he says Adam and Eve. He says Adam and Eve, they need to exist, or they have to exist it, because if you don't have Adam and Eve, you don't have original sin. Well, I'll tell you what, Awesome Avenger. Original sin didn't exist until thousands of years later, after like Christianity was already established. So original sin came from, it was Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine was replying to a letter, or he actually was replying to the belief of Pelagianism. There you go, Pelagianism. And so he goes and he creates this doctrine of original sin. And it wasn't until thousands of years later original sin came to be. But we don't need Jesus because of some sin that Adam and Eve did thousands of years ago. The reason we need Jesus is for the sins we did this morning, and the sins we'll do tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day after that. We don't need Jesus' sin because of the sin of Adam and Eve. We need Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for the sins that we commit every single day. And so I don't believe in original sin. The Catholic Church even understands that if original sin is real, then you need Mary to be immaculate. She needs to be perfect. Mary needs to be the first sinless human. It brings so many implications to the biblical text that is just unnecessary. And I think original sin is a doctrine that is completely unnecessary, and it actually brings more trouble than some when it comes to the Bible. So I think that you don't need it to be the case for Christianity to be true, for Adam and Eve to exist. And Jesus did not die on the cross just for the sins of Adam and Eve, but Jesus died on the cross for the sins that we commit every single day. Jesus died for the sins of the world, not just for the sins of Adam and Eve. So that would be my argument against that. Well, that's the thing. Awesome Avenger says, but was this creating of original sin before or after the supposed death of Jesus? I don't believe original sin exists. There was no original sin because there was no first humans. Humans emerged as a population, and because humans are imperfect, humans therefore will sin, because humans are not God. Humans are not perfect. So that would be my argument for that. And so let me keep on playing our Josh Peck. I hope that answered your question.
Short answer, I don't know, but it's not up to us to decide, because we are called to preach the gospel to every creature. Every creature, exactly. So,
oh, well, he actually said what I had said. Jesus said, preach the gospel to every creature. So, bam, there you have it. He actually said what I just said before he said it.
It's not up to us, but yeah, we have to be aware of what we're dealing here. Pre-flood, when God created Adam, the first man, He breathed into him the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul, and we get that from Genesis 2:7. Now, since then, every descendant of Adam has had this spiritual component to their physiology, and it's called a soul. We have a spirit, we have a soul, we have a body, and it's passed on to them. So clearly, that didn't happen with the Nephilim. They didn't have that same type of thing. The Nephilim were something that were never supposed to be created.
Yeah, and so Awesome Avenger, this is where I would agree. So this whole hangout or discussion is them, like you said, he said they're basically dehumanizing the enemies of God, which is dangerous. Which I would say, yes, that is dangerous. Because then the argument could always go well, the reason why God chose to wipe these people out is because they weren't human and blah blah blah. And so that's what Hitler said about the Jews. Hitler said, "Oh well, the Jews aren't humans." Okay, well that still doesn't mean you should slaughter them and massacre them and stuff like that. Like I said, I think it's more reasonable to just accept that people had wars. That's what people do. People kill each other. People go to war over all the time over land. That is what they did back in their day. And so instead of God going in and ratifying their culture and changing it, God just works with these people. He accommodates with these people where they're at, and he uses their culture and their way of life so it can work out for the better good in the future. So, God isn't changing their culture or their way of life or anything like that. God is simply just revealing himself and accommodating with where these people are already at. So, I think I'm pretty much done looking at this. I've been on this for like a good like what maybe like an hour now, just looking at the video and like going back and forth. Um, I think I'm pretty much done. What I need to do is maybe I might just like download this and I'll make it more what's the word I'm looking for? Uh I want to do like a more professional video to this because I think it deserves it because I think this is a really important subject because I don't want people to start going around with the apologetic that oh yeah like it's completely justifiable to kill somebody if they're not human. I think that's really evil. Um, but with that being said, I think I'm gonna stop broadcasting. I might do another hangout later on. Maybe I mean it could be I might just delete this and do like a whole separate video on this because I don't really like the style I did this and I might just edit a video on my own. I'll see. Maybe I might do a new hangout in like a couple minutes. So let me know if you guys want to actually join the next hangout I'm in. So see you guys later.